Yeah, sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. First, I would like to introduce a bit of myself. I am Chinese by origin. I did my PhD in New Zealand, and it was there I became interested in the law of the Pacific Island countries and international law issues relevant to Pacific Island states. I've been teaching at the law school at USP since 2016. My presentation today looks at Pacific Island states and the law of the sea. First definition, right? Lawyers like definitions. By South Pacific Island states, I refer to developing South Pacific Island states, thus excluding Australia and New Zealand. Right. My presentation today has 5 parts here. As I understand that most of you are not in the field of law, I tailor my presentation to a general intellectual audience. First, I will give you an introduction about the relevance and importance of the law of the sea to South Pacific Island states. Then I will talk about South Pacific Island states' participation in the negotiation and development of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Then I will briefly discuss the roles universities in South Pacific Island states can play through their teaching and researching for the benefit of South Pacific Island states in the field of the law of the sea. And fourthly, I will identify several topics that I think is of great importance and relevance to countries in the region. And fifth, conclusion. So, introduction. South Pacific Island countries are normally referred to as small island countries. And when people outside the region think about Pacific Island countries, they usually think of images like this. But as scholars and politicians have suggested, South Pacific Island states are better or can be better conceptualized as large ocean states. How did that happen? So before the late 1970s and early 1980s, states could claim only a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. Okay, they exercise sovereign rights within 12 nautical miles, no more than that. But in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the regime of an exclusive economic zone became part of the customary international law and later part of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So under the convention, states can claim up to 200 nautical miles of an exclusive economic zone. As the name suggests, the coastal states or the sovereign states has exclusive rights to explore and exploit economic resources within this zone. Okay, so resources in the water and as well as in the deep sea bed. So that is a very important mechanism for small South Pacific Island states. This is what it looks. So this shows you the exclusive economic zone countries in the region claims under the convention. So you can see that even though some of our countries has very tiny land areas, they claim vast maritime zones under the convention. For example, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, somewhere here, Papua New Guinea, and I think, yeah, so Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Papua New Guinea, they actually ranked within the top 20 countries in the world which have the largest exclusive economic zone. So they are amongst the countries which have the largest exclusive economic zone in the world. Just to give you a sense of the difference it makes. So a circle with a radius of 12 nautical miles would cover an area of 1,551.65 square kilometers. Okay, but a circle with a radius of 200 nautical miles covers an area of 431,014 square kilometers. So that is hundreds of times bigger than the original regime. As Camillus Nairobi, a prominent Papua New Guinea lawyer, he's the younger brother of the late Bernard Nairobi. As he said very rightly in his article in 1984, countries in the South Pacific, small in size and lacking direct economic or military muscle, they clearly stand to benefit from the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And here it shows you that the Law of the Sea, centered around the 1982 Convention, also deals with topics other than maritime zones, including boundary delimitation, marine environment conservation, marine scientific research, piracy, deep seabed exploitation, beyond national jurisdiction, that is, and dispute settlement. So it is a vast branch of international law. Now, I would like to show you the history of how South Pacific Island states contributed to the development of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So during the negotiation of the convention during the 60s and 70s, Pacific Island countries pressured for the application of the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone to small islands, okay, as well as land masses. So they argued that because small islands have very little land resources, they would need the benefit of this exclusive economic zone more desperately than any other countries. And they argue that it would be unequitable to deny ocean resources to countries which need them the most. So after a long battle, the right to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone was guaranteed, as you will see on a later slide, by Article 121 of the Convention. Let me give you an example of the valuable and important role Pacific Island states played in this process. So it was suggested by some countries that the exclusive economic zone regime should not be applied to uninhabited islands. Okay? But the delegates of the Federated States of Micronesia argued beautifully that the inhabitation or size of the island should not be or was not a practical or equitable criteria for determining the application of such a regime. They said almost all of our high islands and low-lying atolls are inhabited. Okay, no people live on these islands. But some islands are inhabited only part of the year, while others are used as residences, but for fishing or in some functional way other than permanent habitation. They are all the same as vital a part of our economy and livelihood as some islands that may have permanent dwellings on them, but may have little or no fish resources near them. And this statement was cited in full in the well-known South China Sea arbitration in 2016. The tribunal in that case referred to the Micronesian delegate's statement and concluded that uninhabited islands may be entitled to a 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone if or as long as they have an economic life of their own. Okay, so even uninhabited small islands could be a base or basis for a claim of 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. So that shows you the view of South Pacific island states are regarded as valuable and important by the international community when it comes to the law of the sea. It's just one example I would like to share with you today. So, conclusion for this part, small South Pacific island states can play a valuable and important role, and they should do this. It is in their interest to continue to actively engage in and influence this branch of international law that is of significance and relevance to countries in the region. So what can universities do? The roles of universities, in my view, are as follows. Okay, I think universities in the region can contribute in two ways. First, through their teaching, train current and future generations of officials, scholars, and lawyers that will serve the government and their country. And second, through research, we can inform the governments in the region, and perhaps more importantly, our people, about the decisions the government make. So I did a survey through the region about the teaching and researching of the law of the sea. So currently we have, within the 12 members of PIURN, we have 6 law schools. Okay, USP, UPF here, the University of New Caledonia, UPNG, National University of Fiji, and University of Fiji. So of these 6 universities, 3 currently offers a Law of the Sea course, USP, UPNG, and the University of Fiji. And 2 more teaches the Law of the Sea as part of their public international law course. So they don't have an independent standalone Law of the Sea course, but teaches it as a unit of their public international law course. Because I teach public international law at USP, so I think if you're doing the same way as we do at USP, in public international law, Law of the Sea would be a teaching unit. That means a 2-hour lecture, okay? Maybe perhaps plus a 1-hour tutorial. That's what students will get from a non-standalone course for the Law of the Sea. So in my view, more teaching and or more importantly, high quality teaching of the law of the sea should be promoted for the benefit of the region. In terms of research, as far as I know, there have been few research projects at universities based at South Pacific Island states. So I'm not talking about universities in New Zealand or Australia. There are few law of the sea research projects in the past 10 years. So I think there's something we can do to take the initiative to foster collaboration and do more research that will serve the region. So as my little part of efforts towards that initiative, I identified a few issues which in my view are relevant to the countries in the region. First, ocean boundary delimitation. So as I mentioned, states can claim up to 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone, right? This is a very important resource. However, that doesn't mean that a country can always claim 200 nautical miles. If the distance between two countries are less than 400 nautical miles, then they would not be able to claim, 200 nautical miles. Then the issue of delimitation comes up. So the two countries would have to negotiate based on the principles set forth in the convention to decide where they draw their ocean boundary, boundaries. And as you can see here, several boundaries in the region have not been settled. Okay, so I would just talk about one of them here. The boundary between Tonga and Fiji. So Fiji claimed Fiji has deposited their claimed boundary of exclusive economic zone and deposited this claim with the United Nations Secretary General. So here's the boundary that Fiji claims. On the other hand, Tonga, based on a royal proclamation in 1887, claims a rectangle boundary, as their historic waters. And these two areas overlap here. And there was incidents between the two countries around 2005 and 2000 and it was a mistake. So this part of the overlap has not been settled between the two countries. Besides, Tonga also claims the mineral reefs here. So you might have heard about the mineral reefs and the tension between Fiji and Tonga over these two tiny coral atolls around 2005 and 2011. So Fiji claims that these two reefs fall within Fiji's exclusive economic zone, whereas Tonga claims sovereignty over them. So to resolve these competing claims between Tonga and Fiji, they would have to delimitate, they have to conduct ocean boundary delimitation. Great. A second issue is the legal definition of islands. As I mentioned, South Pacific Island countries played a great role during the process of the development of the convention, but that issue is far from settled. In the recent South China Sea arbitration, the tribunal in that case was the first international judicial body to interpret the meaning of that, that clause in Article 121. And the tribunal's interpretation has been controversial. Okay, so the tribunal said, you know, to sustain an economic life of their own, that means some activities, economic activities of exploitation or exploration or distribution has to be done concerning resources on the island itself. So that means fishing around the island or using the island's seabed would not amount to sustaining economic life of the island sovereign. And the relevance to the region, the competing claims between Vanuatu and France or New Caledonia over the Matthew and Hunter Islands. So both France and Vanuatu claim sovereignty over these two tiny, rocky, high tide elevations here. And both of them claims a 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. But if you remember the Article 121 of the convention I showed you earlier, if a high tide elevation cannot sustain human inhabitation or an economic life of its own, then the sovereign state will not be able to claim a 200 nautical miles exclusive zone. Matthew and Hunter Islands are not inhabited. Nobody lives there. Can it sustain an economic life of its own? That is some question we need to ask. If it can, then France or Vanuatu, whoever justifies their sovereign claim, would be entitled to a large exclusive economic zone as they wish to claim. But if the two rocks or islands cannot sustain economic life of their own, then neither France nor Vanuatu would be entitled to a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone under the convention. So that is another issue I think we academics in the region should look at. Thirdly, climate change and the law of the sea. Climate change absolutely is a priority in the region. How does that relate to the law of the sea? So the maritime zones, states can claim, okay, 200 nautical miles, 12 nautical miles, they are measured from the land. Okay, so from the low water mark line of the land. As the sea level rises, the low water mark line would change, right? So it would push in towards inland. So that would create uncertainty in where the outer boundary of the maritime zone lies. And even more serious or worse question arises when an island becomes entirely submerged due to sea level rise. So now the land has disappeared. Can a sovereign state still claim the maritime zones measured from the land which only previously existed? So that is another question we need to answer. And lastly, some scholars have raised the argument of using the marine environmental protection clauses or provisions in the convention to pursue lawsuits, okay, against countries committing greenhouse emission, as the UN climate change framework does not provide such a compulsory dispute settlement regime. So very briefly, the last two issues which I think are important to the region, this BBNJ, the UN is currently holding several rounds of meetings to negotiate an international legally binding treaty on this topic. I am aware that Solomon Islands, Nauru, and Tonga are participating in the negotiations. But I'm not sure whether other countries are also part of the negotiation. And certainly, there are very limited discussions within the academics in the region on this topic. Implementation of fishery treaties. There are a number of fishery treaties within the region. This is not my field, but I think how do we enforce and implement the fishery treaties to benefit the countries in the region is a very important topic. And as I understand, internationally, there is a gap in literature on enforcement of fishery treaties, so not just in the region. And one of my colleagues at Oxford University, he is writing a book on enforcement of fishery treaty enforcement, but he will be looking at treaties pertaining to the Atlantic Ocean. So I would suggest that academics in our region would also look at the practices of other international regions and see what we should do here. Conclusion. So I think countries in the region can make a significant contribution to the law of the sea, and they should, because it is important for the future, the economic future of the region. And I would very much welcome if you are interested in collaborating, because my colleagues and I at the USP, we intend to organize workshops on the law of the sea, focusing on issues relating to South Pacific, developing South Pacific small islands. So if you're interested, please get in touch. And we need not only legal scholars, but also scientists and sociologists to come up with our own ideas on how this important branch of international law could work for the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Song. We have a short time to discuss for questions, any questions.